The morning sun streamed through the windows of Atlanta Medical Center as Keisha Thompson organized her files for the day. At 32 years old, she had already made a name for herself as one of the most dedicated physical therapists in the facility. Her small office was filled with thank you cards from previous patients, and she took pride in helping people recover their strength and mobility. On this particular Tuesday morning in April, Keisha was reviewing her schedule when her colleague Sarah poked her head through the door. "Hey, Keisha, your 9 a.m. is here. You patient, military veteran." Keisha nodded, quickly adjusting her neat braids and straightening her white coat. As she walked to the waiting area, she could hear the soft whirring of an electric wheelchair. The sound was familiar to her after 6 years of working with patients with mobility issues. Marcus Bennett sat tall in his wheelchair, his broad shoulders and military posture evident despite his condition. At 35, his face showed both strength and gentleness, with warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. A small scar near his right temple told a story of its own. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," Keisha said professionally, extending her hand. "I'm Keisha Thompson, and I'll be your physical therapist." Marcus's handshake was firm and confident. "Please, call me Marcus. Mr. Bennett makes me feel like my father." His voice carried a hint of humor that immediately put Keisha at ease. As they moved to her office, Keisha noticed how skillfully Marcus maneuvered his wheelchair through the doorway. She had seen many patients struggle with this simple task, but his movements showed experience and adaptation. "So, Marcus," Keisha began, settling into her chair and opening his file, "I see you were injured in a military accident 2 years ago." She kept her tone gentle but professional, knowing how difficult it could be for patients to discuss their injuries. Marcus nodded, his expression remaining steady. "Yes, ma'am, I was a sergeant in the Army. Helicopter malfunctioned during a training exercise. Left me with partial paralysis from the waist down." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "But I'm still here, and that's what matters." Something about his positive attitude caught Keisha's attention. Usually, patients who came to her carried their pain like a heavy shield, but Marcus seemed different. He spoke about his condition with acceptance, yet determination. During the initial assessment, Keisha learned more about Marcus's life. He had served in the military for 12 years before the accident. He was born and raised in Columbus, Georgia, and had moved to Atlanta for better medical care. He lived alone but had a sister nearby who helped when needed. As Keisha tested his range of motion and muscle strength, she noticed Marcus had maintained excellent upper body strength. "You've been keeping up with your exercises," she commented, making notes in his file. "Yes, ma'am. The military taught me discipline, and my condition isn't going to take that away from me." His words carried no bitterness, only determination. The assessment continued with Keisha explaining various exercises and stretches they would be working on. She found herself impressed by Marcus's questions. They were thoughtful and showed he had done his research about his condition and recovery options. "Before we end this session," Keisha said, "do you have any goals you'd like to share? What would you like to achieve through therapy?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on the motivational poster on her wall that read, "Every step counts." Then he turned to her with a serious expression. "I want to be as independent as possible. I know my condition has limitations, but I believe I can push those boundaries." His words resonated with Keisha. In her years of practice, she had learned that a patient's mindset was just as important as their physical condition. Marcus had the right attitude for recovery. As she wrapped up the session and scheduled their next appointment, Keisha felt a strange flutter in her chest. There was something special about this patient, his courage, his smile, the way he faced his challenges head-on. Little did she know that this routine Tuesday morning appointment would mark the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. As Marcus wheeled out of her office with a warm, "See you next time, Miss Thompson," Keisha found herself looking forward to their next session more than she probably should. She quickly pushed that thought aside. After all, he was just another patient. Or at least, that's what she told herself. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's therapy sessions became the highlight of Keisha's workdays. She noticed how he always arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in clean athletic wear, with a bright smile that seemed to light up the waiting room. Other staff members began to notice his positive energy too, often commenting on how his laughter could be heard down the hallway during his sessions. One Wednesday afternoon, during their 4th week of therapy, Keisha was helping Marcus with his arm strengthening exercises when he shared more about his life before the accident. You know, I used to teach at the military academy, he said, carefully lifting the weights she had given him. Loved seeing young soldiers find their strength. Keisha adjusted his posture slightly, trying to maintain her professional distance despite her growing interest in his stories. What made you choose teaching? She asked, watching his form carefully. Marcus's face brightened as he spoke. I believe everyone has potential they haven't discovered yet. Sometimes they just need someone to help them see it. He paused his exercise, looking directly at her. Kind of like what you do here, Miss Thompson. Please call me Keisha, she found herself saying, surprising even herself with the informal invitation. After all, we've been working together for a month now. Their sessions began to include more conversation between exercises. Keisha learned about Marcus's dreams of becoming a motivational speaker, his close relationship with his sister Diana, and his love for classic jazz music. He shared funny stories about his military days and spoke honestly about his struggles with people who only saw his wheelchair. One day, after a particularly challenging session, Marcus seemed quieter than usual. Keisha noticed him staring at a young couple walking past the therapy room window, holding hands. Sometimes, he said softly, people assume my life stopped when I sat down in this chair. They think I can't dream of love or marriage anymore. His hands gripped the armrests tightly. They see the chair before they see me. Keisha felt her heart ache at his words. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his shoulder. Those people are missing out on knowing an amazing person, she said firmly. Your chair is just how you move around. It's not who you are. Marcus looked up at her, surprise and gratitude in his eyes. For a moment, they held each other's gaze, and Keisha felt something shift between them. The professional boundary she had carefully maintained began to blur. That evening, as Keisha drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. She tried to remind herself that he was her patient, that there were ethical guidelines about doctor-patient relationships. But her heart wasn't listening to her logical arguments. The following week, during their session, Marcus asked her a question that caught her off guard. Keisha, would you consider having coffee with me? Not here in the hospital, but maybe at that cafe across the street. He quickly added, of course, I understand if it's not appropriate. Keisha felt her heart race. She knew she should say no. It was against hospital policy to date patients. But before she could answer, Marcus spoke again. I've been thinking about transferring to another physical therapist, he said carefully. Not because you're not amazing at your job, but because I'd like to ask you out properly, without any professional complications. His honesty and consideration touched her deeply. After a moment of thought, she replied, Let me help you find a good therapist first. Then we can talk about that coffee. The smile that spread across Marcus's face made her heart skip a beat. They spent the rest of the session discussing potential therapists who could continue his treatment. Keisha recommended Sarah, her colleague who had similar experience with military veterans. As Marcus left that day, both of them knew something significant had changed. The barrier between therapist and patient was about to transform into something else entirely. Keisha watched him wheel down the hallway, realizing that somewhere between the exercises and conversations, she had started seeing far beyond his wheelchair. She saw his strength, his kindness, his determination, and most importantly, the man who made her smile without even trying. That night, as she lay in bed, Keisha knew her life was about to change in ways she never expected. All because of a patient who turned out to be so much more. 2 months after their first coffee date, Keisha decided it was time for Marcus to meet her family. She knew her mother, Gloria Thompson, hosted Sunday dinners every week, where the whole family gathered to share meals and stories. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, but Keisha's stomach was in knots as she drove to pick up Marcus. You look nervous, Marcus said as she helped him transfer from his apartment to her car. He was wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt and had even gotten a fresh haircut for the occasion. Mama can be protective, Keisha replied, carefully folding his wheelchair and storing it in the trunk. And my brother James, well, he has strong opinions about everything. The drive to her mother's house in the suburbs was filled with Marcus asking questions about her family members, trying to remember all the names and relationships Keisha had mentioned. She loved how he genuinely wanted to make a good impression. When they arrived at the modest 2-story house where Keisha grew up, she could see curtains moving in the front window. Her mother was definitely watching. Keisha helped Marcus into his wheelchair and took a deep breath before leading him up the ramp her father had built years ago for her elderly grandmother. Gloria Thompson opened the door before they could knock. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, wearing her favorite Sunday apron. Her smile seemed frozen when she saw Marcus. "Mama, this is Marcus Bennett," Keisha said proudly. "Marcus, this is my mother, Gloria Thompson." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thompson," Marcus said warmly, extending his hand. "Keisha has told me so much about your famous sweet potato pie." Gloria shook his hand briefly, her expression uncertain. "Welcome to our home," she said, stepping aside to let them in. Inside, Keisha's brother James was sitting on the couch with his wife Teresa. He stood up when they entered, his eyes moving from Marcus to Keisha with obvious concern. James had always been overprotective of his little sister, and Keisha could already see the questions forming in his mind. The initial conversations were awkward. Gloria kept asking Marcus if he needed anything, her voice carrying a hint of pity that made Keisha wince. James barely spoke, just watched with narrow eyes as Marcus navigated the living room in his wheelchair. During dinner, the tension finally broke open. "So, Marcus," James said, putting down his fork, "what are your intentions with my sister? How do you plan to provide for her?" "James," Keisha exclaimed, but Marcus touched her hand gently. "It's a fair question," Marcus said calmly. "I may be in a wheelchair, but I have a good military pension. I'm also starting a career as a motivational speaker, sharing my story with veteran groups and schools. But more importantly, I plan to provide Keisha with love, respect, and partnership." Gloria spoke up next, her voice trembling slightly. "But baby," she said to Keisha, "have you really thought this through? Taking care of someone with special needs, it's a big responsibility." Keisha felt anger rising in her chest, but before she could speak, Marcus responded with dignity. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your concerns, but I'm not looking for a caregiver. I'm looking for a partner. I can take care of myself, and I want to take care of Keisha too, in all the ways that matter." "I've seen him do it, Mama," Keisha added firmly. "Marcus is one of the most independent and capable people I know. His wheelchair doesn't define him." Teresa, James's wife, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "I see how Keisha lights up when she talks about Marcus. Isn't that what we all want for her? Someone who makes her happy." The room fell silent. Gloria looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw the love and determination in her eyes. James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but his expression softened slightly. By the end of dinner, small changes were visible. Gloria asked Marcus about his speaking engagements, showing genuine interest. James reluctantly admitted that Marcus's military service was admirable. Even the goodbye hugs felt warmer than the initial greetings. As they drove home that evening, Keisha apologized for her family's behavior. Marcus just smiled and took her hand. "They love you," he said simply. "They just need time to see what you see." Keisha squeezed his hand, realizing that this was just the first of many challenges they would face together. But looking at Marcus's strong profile in the evening light, she knew he was worth fighting for. Their love was worth fighting for. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, after his regular therapy sessions with Sarah at Atlanta Medical Center, Marcus would tell Keisha he was going home to rest. But that wasn't the whole truth. Instead, he would wheel himself to a small private clinic on the other side of town, where Dr. James Chen was helping him with an experimental treatment program. The guilt of keeping this secret from Keisha weighed heavily on Marcus's heart. Each time she asked about his therapy progress, he had to carefully choose his words. He hated not being completely honest with a woman he was growing to love more each day. On this particular Thursday, Marcus was working harder than ever at Dr. Chen's clinic. Sweat dripped down his face as he gripped the parallel bars, his legs trembling with effort. The new treatment, combining electrical stimulation with intensive physical therapy, was showing promising results. "Looking good, Marcus," Dr. Chen said, watching him closely. "You've gained significant strength in your left leg. How does it feel?" Marcus took a deep breath, focusing on his movements. "Better than last week. The tingling sensation is less intense now." He paused, thinking about Keisha. "Doc, I feel bad about keeping this from her." Dr. Chen helped Marcus back into his wheelchair and handed him a towel. "I understand. You were clear about wanting to surprise her. And medically speaking, we needed to be sure the treatment would work before raising anyone's hopes. Later that evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment looking at a photo of Keisha on his phone, his sister Diana stopped by with dinner. She was the only person besides Dr. Chen who knew about the experimental treatment. Still feeling guilty about not telling her? Diana asked, setting down a container of homemade lasagna. Marcus nodded, wheeling himself to the kitchen table. Every time she looks at me with those caring eyes, I want to tell her everything. Yesterday, she was talking about our future together, about making our home wheelchair accessible. If she only knew. Diana sat down across from him. Brother, you're doing this for the right reasons. Imagine her face when you surprise her. Besides, there's still no guarantee how much mobility you'll regain. I managed 10 steps today, Marcus said quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. 10 steps without the bars. Dr. Chen says I'm making remarkable progress. His phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. Hope you're resting well after therapy. Want to have dinner tomorrow night? Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he typed his reply. He suggested they eat at home instead of going out, knowing that his legs would be sore from today's session. Later that night, as Marcus lay in bed, his mind wandered to the ring hidden in his bedside drawer. He had bought it last week, a beautiful diamond ring that reminded him of Keisha's sparkle. His plan was coming together: continue the treatment, propose to her, and then reveal his progress at their wedding. But moments of doubt crept in too. What if the treatment stopped working? What if he couldn't progress beyond those 10 steps? What if Keisha felt betrayed by his secrecy? The next morning, during his regular therapy session with Sarah, he almost slipped up. How are those new exercises working for your legs? Sarah asked, knowing about his secret treatment. They're helping a lot, Marcus started to say, just as Keisha walked past the therapy room. He quickly changed the subject, asking about the weather instead. That evening, when Keisha came over for dinner, she noticed he seemed distracted. Is everything okay? She asked, reaching across the table to hold his hand. Marcus looked into her concerned eyes and felt his heart swell with love. Everything's perfect, he said, squeezing her hand. I'm just thinking about how lucky I am to have you in my life. Keisha smiled, but Marcus could see a hint of worry in her expression. He wanted so badly to share his secret, to tell her about the tiny movements in his legs, about his dreams of standing beside her. Instead, he changed the subject to their weekend plans. That night, after Keisha left, Marcus wheeled himself to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. He touched his legs, feeling the strength building in his muscles. Just a little longer, he whispered to himself. Just a little longer, and I'll show you everything. The morning sun painted Forsyth Park in golden light as Marcus checked his phone for the 10th time. Everything had to be perfect for this day. He had spent weeks planning this moment with Diana's help, making sure every detail was just right. The flowers are in place, Diana texted him, and the photographer is hidden behind the oak tree, just like you asked. Marcus adjusted his tie nervously. He had told Keisha they were going to Savannah for a simple weekend getaway, but he had much bigger plans. The historic fountain in Forsyth Park would be their first stop, where the biggest moment of his life would unfold. Keisha walked beside his wheelchair, admiring the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient trees. She was wearing a yellow sundress that made her dark skin glow in the morning light. This park is beautiful, she said, unaware of what was about to happen. Not as beautiful as you, Marcus replied, his hand touching the ring box hidden in his jacket pocket. His legs tingled with nervous energy, a sensation he had been experiencing more often since starting the secret treatment. As they approached the fountain, Keisha noticed something unusual. A path of red rose petals led to a small table set up near the water. Marcus? She asked, confusion in her voice. What's this? Let's find out, he said with a smile, wheeling himself along the path of roses. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst from his chest. On the table sat a photo album, decorated with their names in gold letters. Open it, Marcus encouraged softly. Keisha's hands trembled slightly as she opened the album. The first page showed a picture of Atlanta Medical Center, where they first met. The next pages contained photos of their first coffee date, their walks in the park, family dinners, and countless moments they had shared over the past months. Marcus. Keisha's voice wavered as she turned each page, reliving their memories together. When she reached the last page, She found a handwritten note. "Turn around." Keisha turned to find Marcus holding a red rose in one hand and a small velvet box in the other. His eyes were shining with tears of joy. "Keisha Thompson," he began, his voice full of emotion, "before I met you, I thought my life had been limited by this wheelchair. But you showed me that love has no limitations. You saw past my disability and straight into my heart." Tears started rolling down Keisha's cheeks as she realized what was happening. Nearby, early morning joggers stopped to watch the scene unfold. "You've taught me that true love doesn't see barriers," Marcus continued. "It doesn't see wheelchairs or limitations. It only sees possibilities." He opened the ring box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring that sparkled in the sunlight. "You make me want to be better every day. You make me believe in miracles." Keisha covered her mouth with her hands, tears flowing freely now. In the distance, Diana watched from behind a tree, wiping her own tears while holding her phone to record the moment. "I promise to love you every day of my life," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "I promise to be your partner in every way that matters. I promise to support your dreams just as you've supported mine." He held up the ring. "Keisha Thompson, will you marry me?" For a moment, the only sound was the fountain's gentle splashing. Then Keisha nodded, words failing her. "Yes," she finally managed to say through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." She bent down to kiss him, and the small crowd that had gathered burst into applause. Diana emerged from her hiding spot, hugging them both as the photographer captured every moment. As Marcus slipped the ring onto Keisha's finger, he thought about his secret therapy sessions. Soon, he would give her an even bigger surprise. But for now, this moment was perfect just as it was. Later, as they celebrated with champagne at a nearby cafe, Keisha couldn't stop looking at her ring. "I can't believe you planned all this," she said, her face glowing with happiness. Marcus held her hand across the table, thinking about how far they had come and the journey still ahead. "You deserve everything beautiful in this world," he said softly. "This is just the beginning." 3 months before the wedding, Keisha and Marcus sat in their new apartment, surrounded by wedding magazines and color samples. The living room was a maze of planning materials, with Keisha's mother Gloria and Marcus's sister Diana joining them for what had become their weekly wedding planning session. "The venue is wheelchair accessible," Keisha said, checking another item off their list. "And they promised to set up ramps wherever needed." She looked at Marcus with love, always thinking about making things comfortable for him. What Keisha didn't know was that Marcus had a different concern on his mind. Earlier that day, he had another secret session with Dr. Chen. His progress was remarkable. He could now stand for several minutes and take over 20 steps with minimal support. "The navy blue suits for the groomsmen are perfect," Diana said, breaking Marcus's thoughts. She was the only one who knew about his intensive therapy sessions and the real reason he scheduled the wedding 6 months after the proposal. Gloria, who had completely changed her attitude toward Marcus over the past months, was busy making notes about the catering. "Now, about the first dance," she began carefully. "Have you two decided how you want to handle that?" Marcus felt his heart race. This was the moment he had been dreading. "Actually," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I have some ideas about that, but I'd like it to be a surprise." Keisha looked at him curiously. "A surprise? But honey, we should practice it beforehand." "Trust me," Marcus said, reaching for her hand. "Sarah has been helping me work on something special." It wasn't entirely a lie. Sarah did know about his progress and was helping to cover for his secret therapy sessions. Later that evening, after Gloria and Diana left, Marcus wheeled himself to their bedroom window. His legs were sore from the day's therapy, but it was a good kind of pain. He watched Keisha organizing wedding samples, her engagement ring catching the light as she moved. 25 steps today, he whispered to himself, too quietly for Keisha to hear. Just need 50 more for our first dance. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Between cake tastings, flower arrangements, and venue visits, Marcus continued his secret therapy sessions. Each small victory, standing longer, walking farther, brought him closer to his dream of surprising Keisha at their wedding. One afternoon, while Keisha was at work, Dr. Chen recorded a video of Marcus walking the length of the therapy room. "This is incredible progress," the doctor said, showing Marcus the video. "But remember, you still need to be careful. Don't push too hard." Marcus nodded, though his mind was already counting the steps he would need for their first dance. That evening, when Keisha asked why he seemed extra tired, he blamed it on wedding stress. The guilt of keeping this secret sometimes kept him awake at night. He would watch Keisha sleeping peacefully beside him and wonder if he was doing the right thing. But then he would imagine her face when he stood up at their wedding, and his determination would return stronger than ever. 2 weeks before the wedding, during a final suit fitting, the tailor looked confused. "Sir, are you sure about these measurements? The pants seem different from your initial fitting." Marcus exchanged a knowing look with Diana, who had accompanied him. "Yes, I'm sure. Please make them exactly as specified." The pants needed to fit him properly while standing, though he couldn't explain that to the tailor. The night before their rehearsal dinner, Keisha found Marcus looking at old photographs of himself before the accident. "Are you okay?" she asked, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Marcus took her hand and kissed it gently. "I'm perfect," he said. "Just thinking about how life has changed. How you changed everything for me." "You changed everything for me too," Keisha replied softly, not knowing just how much change was still to come. As they went to bed that night, Marcus silently rehearsed the steps he had perfected over the past months. In just a few days, he would give Keisha the surprise of her life. Every sore muscle, every secret session, every white lie had led to this moment. He prayed it would all be worth it when he saw her face at their wedding reception. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, as sunshine streamed through the windows of the Magnolia Gardens Event Center. In the bridal suite, Keisha sat in front of a large mirror while her mother adjusted her veil. The white wedding dress, carefully chosen to complement her deep brown skin, flowed beautifully around her. "You look like an angel," Gloria said, tears forming in her eyes. She had come a long way from her initial doubts about Marcus. Now, she couldn't imagine a better match for her daughter. Meanwhile, in the groom's room, Marcus was getting ready with help from his best man, his former military buddy Mike. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his bow tie. Today wasn't just their wedding day, it was the day of his big revelation. "You sure you can do this?" Mike whispered, helping Marcus with his jacket. He was one of the few people who knew about the surprise plan for the reception. Marcus nodded, determination in his eyes. "I've been practicing for months. Nothing can stop me today." His legs felt strong, though hidden beneath his perfectly tailored pants as he sat in his wheelchair. The ceremony space looked magical. White and purple flowers decorated the aisle, which had been made extra wide to accommodate Marcus's wheelchair. Guests began filling the seats, their excited chatter filling the air. Diana peeked into Keisha's room. "It's almost time, sis-to-be." She helped arrange Keisha's train, carefully hiding her own excitement about what would happen later at the reception. As the music started, Marcus wheeled himself to the altar, his heart pounding. He positioned himself carefully, remembering Dr. Chen's instructions about conserving his strength for later. The guests smiled warmly, some wiping tears as they saw the love radiating from his face. Then the bridal march began, and everyone stood. Keisha appeared at the entrance with her father, looking radiant in her wedding dress. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. She was more beautiful than he had ever imagined. As Keisha walked down the aisle, she couldn't take her eyes off Marcus. His smile, his love-filled gaze, made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. She barely noticed the happy tears rolling down her cheeks. The ceremony was deeply moving. When they exchanged vows, Marcus's voice was strong and clear. "Keisha, you saw me for who I am, not what I couldn't do. You taught me that love has no boundaries. Today, I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you that your love has made me stronger than I ever thought possible." Keisha's vows made everyone cry. "Marcus, you showed me what true courage looks like. Your strength isn't just in your body. It's in your heart, your spirit, and your unwavering love. I promise to walk beside you through every journey life brings us." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was met with thunderous applause. As they moved down the aisle together, Keisha walking beside Marcus's wheelchair, guests threw white rose petals in celebration. The photography session followed, with the photographer capturing beautiful moments of their love. Marcus insisted on several shots in different locations around the garden, secretly preserving his energy for what was to come. As the afternoon turned to evening, guests moved to the reception hall. The space was transformed into an elegant wonderland with twinkling lights and floating candles. The head table was positioned perfectly, giving everyone a clear view of what would soon unfold. Marcus squeezed Diana's hand as she helped him get settled at the table. "Everything ready?" he whispered. "All set," she confirmed quietly. "Dr. Chen is in position, and Mike has the music queued up." Keisha was glowing with happiness as she greeted their guests, completely unaware of the surprise that awaited her. She occasionally glanced at Marcus with such love that it made his heart ache with anticipation. As the reception began and dinner was served, Marcus could barely eat. His mind was focused on what was about to happen. Years of military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, but this moment tested all his strength. The time for the family toast was approaching. Marcus touched his legs under the table, feeling the strength he had built over months of secret therapy. Soon, very soon, he would show everyone, especially his beautiful bride, that love truly could work miracles. The reception hall buzzed with excitement as James, Keisha's brother, stood up for the family toast. Crystal glasses sparkled under the warm lighting as guests prepared to raise them in celebration of the newlyweds. "When I first met Marcus," James began, smiling at his new brother-in-law, "I had my doubts. Like many of us, I only saw his wheelchair." He paused, looking at Keisha. "But my sister saw something more. She saw his heart, his strength, and his incredible spirit." Marcus squeezed Keisha's hand under the table, his heart racing. The moment he had practiced for months was finally here. Dr. Chen stood quietly near the back of the room, ready to assist if needed. Diana gripped her phone tightly, prepared to capture everything. "So, I'd like to propose a toast," James continued, "to Marcus and Keisha. May your love continue to prove that nothing is impossible." As guests raised their glasses, Marcus whispered to Keisha, "Honey, I have something to tell you." His voice trembled slightly with emotion. "What is it?" Keisha asked, turning toward him with concern in her eyes. Marcus took a deep breath. "For the past 8 months, I've been keeping a secret." The room grew quiet as guests noticed something was happening at the head table. "I've been going to special therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, trying something experimental." Keisha's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Marcus pushed his wheelchair back slightly from the table. Mike, his best man, quickly moved to his side, ready to spot him if needed. The room fell completely silent. "When I met you," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, "I promised myself that if I ever got the chance to marry you, I would give you the perfect first dance." Slowly, carefully, Marcus placed his hands on the arms of his wheelchair. Keisha's hand flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. With strength built from months of secret training, Marcus began to push himself up. "Oh my God," Keisha whispered, tears already streaming down her face. Gloria grabbed her husband's hand tightly, watching in amazement. Marcus stood up, his legs shaking slightly but holding firm. The room erupted in gasps and crying. Keisha stood frozen, her hands still covering her mouth, tears flowing freely. "Dr. Chen helped me find an experimental treatment," Marcus explained, standing tall in his wedding suit. "I wanted to surprise you on our perfect day." He took a small step toward her, then another. The photographer's camera clicked rapidly, capturing every precious moment. Diana was filming everything, her own tears making it hard to hold the phone steady. Marcus reached out his hand to Keisha. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Bennett?" The band began playing their song, At Last by Etta James. Keisha took his hand, still crying with joy. "You learned to walk, for me?" she managed to say through her tears. "For us," Marcus corrected, pulling her close. "Every step I learned was thinking of this moment with you." They began to sway together, Marcus's movements careful but steady. The guests watched in awe as the couple shared their first dance, defying what everyone had thought possible. "I can't believe you kept this secret all this time," Keisha said softly, looking into his eyes. Marcus smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It wasn't easy. Every time you talked about making our home wheelchair accessible, I wanted to tell you, but I wanted this moment to be perfect." As they danced, their family and friends watched through tears of joy. Gloria hugged Diana, both women crying happy tears. James stood with his arm around his wife, shaking his head in amazement at the man he had once doubted. The dance wasn't long. Marcus was still building his strength, but it was perfect. As the song ended, he pulled Keisha close and kissed her deeply, prompting another round of applause from their guests. I love you, he whispered against her lips. Thank you for showing me that love has no limits. Keisha held him tightly, her voice full of emotion. And thank you for showing me that miracles do happen. As they sat back down together, with Marcus returning to his wheelchair for the rest of the evening to conserve his strength, both knew their life together would be filled with more wonderful surprises. Their love story had proved that with determination, support, and love, nothing was impossible.